Ilara Kane walked into the jagged peaks of the Whisperwind Mountains for a single, solemn purpose: to die. The world had already taken everything from her: her husband, Thomas, claimed by the river's fury, and her little boy, Samuel, stolen by the winter fever that followed. Her heart was a hollowed-out cavern, echoing with the ghosts of laughter and love. The small cabin at the edge of the dust-choked town of Redemption was no longer a home, but a tomb filled with memories that cut deeper than any blade. So she had walked away, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the crushing weight of a grief so profound it had blotted out the sun. She sought a final peace in the indifferent silence of stone and sky, a place where her bones could rest, forgotten and undisturbed. She climbed until her lungs burned and her legs screamed, until the world below was just a hazy memory. She found a small, sheltered overhang, a shallow cave carved by millennia of wind, and there she sat, waiting for the cold to claim her. But the end did not come quietly. Instead, it was heralded by a sound so out of place in that desolate wilderness that Ilara thought she had finally gone mad. It was a cry. A thin, desperate wail that pierced the silence like a needle. For a moment, she ignored it, closing her eyes, believing it to be a trick of the wind, a phantom echo of her own lost child. But it came again, stronger this time, insistent and undeniably real. A flicker of something she hadn't felt in a year, a protective instinct, stirred in the ashes of her soul. She rose, her body aching, and followed the sound. Just a few yards away, tucked behind a cluster of frost-covered rocks, lay a bundle. It was a woman's shawl, thick and woven with deep crimson threads, wrapped tightly around a small form. As Ilara knelt, her breath catching in her throat, she saw the source of the cry. A baby. A tiny girl, her face red and puckered from the cold and from screaming, her eyes squeezed shut against a world that had already treated her with unimaginable cruelty. Beside the infant lay a woman, her face pale and serene in death, a dusting of snow on her dark hair. Her arms were still curled protectively, as if her last act on earth was to shield her child. There was no sign of violence, only the profound exhaustion of a journey that had ended here. Ilara looked from the dead mother to the living child, and the universe seemed to hold its breath. Here, at the very altar of her own despair, she was being presented with the one thing she could not ignore, a life that needed saving. Her plan to die felt like a distant, selfish dream. The cold was already setting in, and the baby's cries were growing weaker. To leave her would be a sentence of death, a sin Ilara could not carry, even into the grave. With trembling hands, she gently unwrapped the shawl. Tucked inside was a small, silver locket, cold against the baby's skin. Without opening it, Ilara bundled the child more securely and pulled the tiny body against her own, offering what little warmth she had left. She looked at the dead mother one last time. "I'll protect her," she whispered, the words a vow that sealed her fate. Her journey into the mountains to find an end had led her, instead, to a beginning. But as she started the treacherous climb down, the weight of the child in her arms a strange and heavy comfort, she had no idea that she had just picked up a secret that powerful men would kill to keep buried. The descent was a nightmare of slipping rock and biting wind, but the small, warm weight against Ilara's chest was a constant, driving force. It was a reason. After months of having none, the simple, primal need to protect this infant was enough to fuel her exhausted body. She reached her derelict cabin as the last rays of sunlight bled from the sky, the small structure looking more forlorn than ever. Inside, it was cold and still, thick with dust and the scent of sorrow. But now, there was a new sound, the soft gurgling of a baby waking from a fitful sleep. Ilara worked with a desperate, forgotten energy. She stoked the embers in the hearth until a fire crackled to life, bathing the single room in a warm, flickering glow. She found the last of her goat's milk, warming it carefully by the flames and feeding the hungry child with a makeshift cloth teat. The baby drank greedily, her tiny fists clenching and unclenching. As the infant drifted into a peaceful sleep in a drawer padded with old blankets, Ilara finally allowed herself to examine the crimson shawl and the silver locket. The shawl was finely made, its wool impossibly soft, with a small, embroidered crest near the corner, a hawk in flight over a mountain peak. It was the mark of a wealthy family, something utterly alien to the hardscrabble folk of Redemption. The locket was heavy, its surface smooth and unadorned. Her fingers trembled as she pried it open. Inside were two miniature portraits. On one side, the beautiful, dark-haired woman from the mountain. On the other, a handsome man with kind eyes and a familiar crest pinned to his coat. They were a family. What would you do in this situation? Would you take the locket to the town sheriff, or would you hide it, fearing the story it might tell? Let me know in the comments. Ilara snapped the locket shut, a cold dread seeping into her bones. This was no ordinary abandonment. This was a flight from something terrible. Her instinct screamed at her to hide the evidence. She tucked the locket and shawl deep inside her empty flower chest, just as a hard, rhythmic pounding rattled her door. Her heart leaped into her throat. She looked at the sleeping baby, then at the door, her mind racing. No one ever came to her cabin. The pounding came again, louder this time, insistent. "Open up. We know someone's in there," a gruff voice commanded. Taking a deep breath, Ilara smoothed her worn dress and opened the door just a crack. Two men stood on her porch, their silhouettes stark against the twilight. One was a hulking brute with a mean, pinched face. The other, younger man, had a conflicted look in his eyes, a flicker of humanity that the other lacked. His name was Jebediah, and though Ilara didn't know it, he was a man walking a knife's edge between duty and conscience. The brute, whose name was Silas Blackwood's Fist, grunted, "We're looking for a woman. Came through here." Dark hair, carrying a bundle, Ilara's blood ran cold. She kept her face a mask of weary indifference. "I've seen no one. I keep to myself," the man sneered, his eyes scanning the interior of her cabin. "Mr. Blackwood wants her found. There's a reward." His gaze lingered on the hearth, on the single drawer pulled out by the fire. "Seems awfully cozy in there for a woman living alone." Before Ilara could answer, a tiny whimper came from the drawer. It was barely audible, but in the tense silence, it sounded like a thunderclap. The man's eyes narrowed. "What was that?" he snarled, pushing the door wider. Ilara's mind worked faster than it ever had before. She slammed her shoulder against the door, trying to force it shut, but the brute was too strong. "It's just a cat," she lied, her voice shaking. "A stray I took in." "It's sick." The man, whose name was Pike, laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Mr. Blackwood ain't looking for no cat." He shoved the door open, sending Ilara stumbling backward. He and Jebediah stepped inside, their presence filling the small cabin, making it feel like a cage. Pike's eyes immediately fixed on the drawer by the fire. He started toward it, a cruel smirk on his face. "Let's see this sick little kitty's." Panic seized Ilara. In that moment, she was no longer the grieving widow who had welcomed death, she was a lioness defending her cub. She grabbed the heavy iron poker from the hearth, its heat a familiar sting in her palm. "Get out of my house," she said, her voice low and trembling with a rage that surprised even herself. Pike stopped, his eyes widening in amusement. "Well, look at that. The little mouse has claws." Jebediah, however, looked uneasy. He glanced from Ilara's desperate face to the drawer, then back to Pike. "Pike, maybe we should go. If she says it's a cat, it's a cat." Mr. Blackwood said find a woman and a baby, not terrorize a widow. Pike shot him a venomous look. "You getting soft, Jeb? There's a bonus if we find that brat." "Now stand aside." He lunged for the drawer, but Ilara was faster. She swung the poker, not at him, but at the stone hearth, striking it with a loud, ringing clang that made both men jump. In the same motion, she kicked a small wooden stool into Pike's path, sending him sprawling. "I said, get out," she screamed, her voice raw. Just then, a loud, convincing meow came from beneath the floorboards near the wall. Ilara froze, confused for a split second, before realizing her lie had been given an impossible lifeline. A scrawny grey cat, the true stray she occasionally fed, darted out from a loose board and shot past their feet, out the open door. Pike, on the floor, looked from the fleeing cat to the drawer with a flicker of doubt. Jebediah seized the moment. "See? A cat! Just like she said." "We're wasting our time here," Pike grumbled, getting to his feet and dusting himself off, his ego clearly bruised. He shot Ilara one last, suspicious glare. If we find out you're lying. Mr. Blackwood ain't a forgiving man. He turned and stomped out of the cabin, with Jebediah following close behind. The younger man paused at the door, his eyes meeting Ilara's for a brief, significant moment. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a silent warning, before disappearing into the night. Ilara bolted the door and sagged against it, her body trembling uncontrollably. The baby, miraculously, had remained silent through the ordeal. She rushed to the drawer and scooped the infant into her arms, holding her tight. She was safe, for now. But she knew, with chilling certainty, that they would be back. The man they had mentioned, Silas Blackwood, was the wealthiest and most feared man in the territory, a ruthless tyrant who owned the mines, the river, and seemingly, the law itself. His name was only ever spoken in whispers, tied to stories of ruin and ruthless ambition. And for some reason, he wanted this baby. Ilara knew she couldn't stay. Her small cabin was no longer a shelter, it was a trap. With the firelight dancing on the baby's peaceful face, Ilara made another vow. She wouldn't just protect her, she would find out why she was being hunted. She had to understand the story hidden in that silver locket. For that, she would have to walk back into the very town she had abandoned, into the heart of the danger itself. If you're enjoying this story of courage and survival, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us create more content just like this. The next morning, under a sky the color of lead, Ilara disguised herself as best she could. She bundled the baby, whom she had started calling Lily, against her chest, hidden beneath her own heavy cloak. She left her cabin behind without a backward glance, the cold ashes in the hearth a perfect symbol for the life she was leaving forever. Her destination was the town of redemption, a place she had once fled but now had to face. She needed answers, and she suspected the key lay in the town's dusty, forgotten records. She moved along the edge of the woods, avoiding the main road, her senses on high alert for any sign of Blackwood's men. Redemption was just as she remembered it, a collection of weary wooden buildings slouching under the oppressive gaze of the Blackwood Mining Company headquarters, a grim stone edifice that loomed over the town like a vulture. People hurried along the muddy street, their heads down, their faces etched with the hardship of living under Silas Blackwood's thumb. Ilara slipped into the county records office, a small, cramped building that smelled of decaying paper and solitude. Behind a tall counter sat a frail, elderly man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose. His name was Ezra, and he had been the town clerk for 50 years, a quiet observer of every secret and scandal that had ever unfolded in Redemption. He looked up, his pale blue eyes blinking in surprise. He recognized Ilara. "Mrs. Kane. I am sorry for your loss. I had not expected to see you back in town." Ilara offered a tight, painful smile. "I need to look at some records, Ezra. Property deeds. From about 20 years ago." Ezra's brow furrowed. "That's an unusual request. May I ask why?" Instead of answering, Ilara opened her cloak just enough for him to see the sleeping face of the baby. Then, she placed the silver locket on the counter. Ezra's gasp was sharp. He picked up the locket with a trembling hand, his face draining of color as he opened it. "Mary, Mother of God," he whispered, staring at the portraits. "Isabella. And Thomas Jr." He looked at Ilara, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "Where did you find this child?" Ilara quickly told him a shortened version of the story, omitting her own journey of despair and focusing on the dead mother and the pursuing men. Ezra listened, his expression growing more grave with every word. "Silas Blackwood is hunting this child," he said, his voice barely a whisper. This baby changes everything." He beckoned her behind the counter, into the dusty archives. "Silas Blackwood did not build his empire, my dear," Ezra explained, pulling down a heavy ledger. "He stole it. He had a younger brother, Thomas Blackwood Sr., the man in that locket. He was a good man, fair and just. He owned this entire valley. But he died in a tragic hunting accident 2 decades ago, leaving Silas as the sole heir." Ezra's finger traced a line in the ledger. "But Thomas had a son, Thomas Jr. He was sent away to school back east, before the accident. Silas claimed his nephew wanted nothing to do with this harsh land. But the truth is, Thomas Jr. came back a year ago. He had fallen in love with a local girl, Isabella. They were secretly married. He looked at Ilara, his eyes burning with an ancient injustice. Silas found out. He couldn't stand the thought of his brother's line continuing, of the land passing to its rightful heir. He had the marriage annulled through fraud and threats, and he drove Thomas Jr. out of the territory, claiming he had abandoned his pregnant wife. Isabella fled into the mountains to save her child from him. The baby in Ilara's arms was Serafina Blackwood, the true and rightful heir to the entire valley. The crest on the shawl was the original Blackwood family crest, one Silas had tried to erase from history. The weight of this truth was staggering. Ilara wasn't just protecting an orphan, she was safeguarding a legacy, holding the living proof of a tyrant's greatest crime. Just then, the bell on the office door chimed. Ilara's blood turned to ice. A broad-shouldered man wearing the badge of a company guard filled the doorway. He pinned a notice to the public board. It was a wanted poster. Not for a woman and a child, but for Ilara Kane. It accused her of kidnapping and offered a handsome reward for her capture, signed by Silas Blackwood himself. He had turned the town against her. She was no longer a protector, in the eyes of the world, she was a criminal. Ezra quickly shuffled her and the baby into a hidden back room just as the guard turned, his eye sweeping the office. The back room was small and suffocating, filled with stacks of brittle documents that seemed to absorb all the air. Ilara held her breath, pressing Serafina, tighter against her. She could hear the guard talking to Ezra in a low, menacing tone. She heard the clink of coins on the counter and the guard's final, chilling words, "Keep your eyes open, old man. Blackwood wants the woman. He doesn't care how you get her." The silence that followed his departure was heavier than any sound. Ezra slowly opened the door, his face a parchment of worry. "He's made you the enemy," he whispered. "No one will help you now. They're too afraid of him, or too hungry for his money." Ilara's hope, a tiny, fragile flame, wavered. "What can I do? Where can I go?" Ezra's gaze sharpened with resolve. "There is one person who might help. But it is a dangerous path." He told her of Jebediah. "He works for Blackwood, but he is not like the others. His father was a good friend of Thomas Blackwood Sr. Jebediah is trapped, indebted to Silas for his family's land. But his soul is not yet owned." Ezra gave her directions to a remote cabin where Jebediah's family lived, and a coded message, a question about the hawk's flight, that would tell him she could be trusted. He pressed a small bag of coins and dried food into her hands. "Go now. And may Providence guide you." Ilara's flight from redemption was fraught with peril. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every stranger's glance felt like an accusation. She traveled for 2 days, sleeping in cold ravines and foraging for food, her strength waning but her determination hardening into steel. She found the cabin, a modest but well-kept homestead tucked away in a hidden valley. As she approached, Jebediah himself stepped out, a rifle in his hand, his face a mask of suspicion. "That's far enough," he called out. Ilara stopped, her heart pounding. She held up a hand, her voice clear and steady. "I was told to ask you about the hawk's flight at dawn." Jebediah's posture changed instantly. The suspicion in his eyes was replaced by a deep, weary sorrow. He lowered the rifle and beckoned her forward. Inside, his wife tended to their 2 small children. The sight of the happy family was a painful reminder of all Ilara had lost, and all Serafina deserved. That night, Jebediah's conflict was a palpable storm within him. His loyalty to Blackwood was a chain forged of debt and fear, but Ilara's story, and the sight of the innocent child, was a fire melting its links. The breaking point came the next day. Pike arrived, his face livid with fury. "Blackwood knows the old clerk helped her. He wants the clerk's office burned to the ground tonight. And he wants us to search this whole valley. He said if we find the woman, we take the kid. If she resists," Pike made a cruel, dismissive gesture. Accidents happen. After Pike left, Jebediah looked at his wife and children, and then at Ilara holding Serafina. He saw the 2 paths laid before him, one of continued servitude to evil, the other of rebellion and redemption. His choice was clear. "He will not stop," Jebediah said, his voice thick with emotion. "He will burn the whole world down to get his hands on that child. There is only one way to end this. We must face him." He then revealed the final piece of the puzzle. There is a hidden will. Thomas Blackwood Sr.'s true last will and testament. My father was a witness. He told me where it was hidden before he died. It's at the old Blackwood homestead, the one Silas abandoned because it reminded him of his brother. It names his son, and any of his heirs, as the sole inheritors. That document is Silas's ruin. The plan was desperate, almost suicidal. They would go to the old homestead, retrieve the will, and use it to expose Blackwood. But they knew he would not let them leave alive. It was a trap, but it was also their only hope. As a storm gathered on the horizon, mirroring the tempest in their hearts, Ilara, Jebediah, and the infant Seraphina set out for the final confrontation. They were no longer running. They were heading into the heart of the beast to reclaim a stolen future or die trying. The old Blackwood homestead stood on a windswept bluff, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised purple sky. Rain began to fall, cold and relentless, turning the dirt path to mud. The house was a monument to decay, with boarded-up windows and a porch that sagged like a tired old man. It was the perfect stage for a final act of justice or a tragedy. Jebediah led them through a loose cellar door, into the damp, musty darkness below the house. "The will is hidden inside the main hearth," he whispered, lighting a lantern. Behind a false stone my father helped build as he worked to pry the stone loose. Ilara clutched Seraphina, her ears straining against the rising howl of the wind and rain. The baby was quiet, as if she sensed the gravity of the moment. Just as Jebediah's fingers closed around a tin box, the floorboards above them creaked. They were not alone. "I knew you'd come here, Jebediah," a voice boomed from above, dripping with smug satisfaction. It was Silas Blackwood. "A sentimental fool, just like your father." Heavy footsteps descended the cellar stairs. Blackwood appeared in the lantern light, flanked by Pike and 2 other guards. His face was a mask of triumphant fury, his smile as cold as a winter wind. "Give me the child and the box," he commanded, extending a gloved hand. "And I might let you walk away." Ilara stepped forward, positioning herself between Blackwood and Jebediah. The terrified woman who had climbed a mountain to die was gone. In her place stood a protector, her eyes blazing with righteous fire. "You will not touch her," she said, her voice ringing with unshakable conviction. Blackwood laughed. "You? A broken widow with nothing to her name? You think you can stop me? That child is a loose end, a mistake that should have been erased in the mountains. Give her to me." It was then that Jebediah stood up, holding the tin box in one hand and his rifle in the other. "No, Silas. It's over. Your brother's legacy will not be buried." Pike lunged at Jebediah, but Ilara was ready. She swung the heavy lantern, smashing it against his head. The man crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The lantern shattered, and burning oil spread across the damp floor, the flames licking at the dry wooden stairs. In the chaos, Blackwood drew a pistol, his face contorted in a snarl. He aimed not at Jebediah, but at Ilara and the baby. "If I can't have the valley, no one will," he screamed. But before he could fire, a new voice echoed from the top of the stairs. "Drop it, Blackwood!" Old Ezra stood there, flanked by the town sheriff and a half-dozen deputized townsfolk, their faces grim and determined. The fire at the records office had been the final straw, proof of Blackwood's tyranny that they could no longer ignore. Cornered and exposed, Blackwood let out a roar of pure hatred. He turned his pistol on Ezra, but Jebediah was quicker. A single shot rang out, and Blackwood fell, clutching his shoulder, the pistol clattering to the floor. The fire was spreading fast now, consuming the house that was built on lies. The sheriff and his men apprehended Blackwood and his remaining guard, dragging them out into the rain. Jebediah grabbed the tin box, and Ilara, shielding Seraphina, followed Ezra up and out of the burning cellar, emerging into the clean, rain-washed air of a world made new. The fire behind them was a funeral pyre for an age of darkness. The conclusive epilogue to this story of injustice is one of profound and satisfying resolution. With the discovery of Thomas Blackwood Sr.'s true will, Silas Blackwood's entire empire crumbled. He was tried not only for his countless crimes of fraud and intimidation but for the conspiracy that led to the death of his nephew and the persecution of Isabella. Stripped of his wealth and power, he spent the rest of his miserable days in a federal prison, a forgotten man haunted by the ghosts of those he had wronged. Pike and the other henchmen faced their own justice, scattered and broken. Jebediah, hailed as a hero, was pardoned for his time with Blackwood. He refused any reward, asking only for a clear title to his family's land, which he received. He became a respected leader in the community, a living testament to the idea that it is never too late to choose the right path. The town of Redemption, freed from its tyrant, began to breathe again. Hope, once a foreign currency, became its most valued asset. And Elara Kane, the woman who had sought death, found life in its most potent form. As the legal guardian of the infant Serafina Blackwood, she became the steward of the valley. She did not live in a grand mansion, but rebuilt her own small cabin, making it a true home filled with warmth and laughter. She raised Serafina not as a wealthy heiress, but as her own daughter, teaching her the values of courage, compassion, and justice that she had learned on her harrowing journey. The crimson shawl and the silver locket were kept not as symbols of a painful past, but as reminders of the enduring power of a mother's love. Elara Kane found her purpose not in forgetting her grief, but in transforming it into a fierce, protective love that rebuilt a broken world. Her heart, once a hollow cavern, was now a garden, and little Serafina was the flower that bloomed there. If her story of incredible courage moved you, click on the video you see on the screen now for another tale of unbelievable resilience and justice.